"She's not really a maid," the little girl whispered. When he finally checked the security tapes, what he saw made him question everything about the woman he'd let into their home. Lila sat cross-legged on the edge of the big bay window, her notebook tucked beneath her thigh, and a pencil tapping softly against her chin. The rain outside streaked down the glass in slow, crooked lines, matching the quiet rhythm of the thoughts inside her head. From this spot on the second floor of Blake Carter's mansion, she could see almost everything. The long driveway with the black iron gates, the garage with 3 cars she was never allowed to touch, the trimmed lawn that was always perfect, and inside, the people who moved through the house like they belonged, like everything made sense. She knew better. In the 3 foster homes before this one, Lila had learned to stay quiet. Quiet kids didn't get punished for things they didn't do. Quiet kids didn't make adults uncomfortable. Quiet kids stayed longer. She watched. She listened. And she never spoke until she was sure someone would actually hear her. Blake Carter wasn't cruel like some of the others. He didn't shout. He didn't throw things. He didn't forget meals or leave her alone for days. But he was something else. Distant. Distracted. He treated her like a puzzle he couldn't quite solve but didn't want to force together. He'd adopted her after his sister died suddenly, leaving Lila behind with no one else. It had been 6 months now, and still, everything felt temporary. She had a beautiful room, with a bed bigger than any she'd ever seen, shelves full of books, and toys arranged like they were in a store display. But none of it felt hers, not really. Blake had given her everything she needed, but not what she wanted most. Attention, warmth, a reason to believe this house might finally be her home. That's why she watched. Because watching helped her feel a little more in control, a little less invisible. And that's how she noticed something strange about Marta. The maid was always smiling, always humming soft, sweet songs in a language Lila didn't recognize. She cleaned fast, moved quiet, and never raised her voice. Everyone in the house seemed to like her, even Blake. But Lila didn't trust her. It started small. A drawer left open after Marta left the study. A framed photo of Blake and his sister tilted slightly on the piano, when no one else had touched it. Her aunt's bracelet, the one she'd seen in the jewelry box last week, suddenly gone. And then there was the hallway mirror. Lila had watched Marta pass it 5 different times in one day, and not once had she looked at her reflection. Not once. As if she didn't want to see herself. Most people glanced at mirrors without thinking. Marta avoided them. Lila wrote it all down in her notebook. She made columns, dates, times, what Marta had touched, where she had gone, who she had spoken to. It felt like building a case, even if no one had asked for one, even if no one would believe her. She didn't know what Marta was doing exactly, but she was sure of one thing: this maid wasn't just a maid. And one day soon, Lila was going to prove it. Lila stayed quiet when Marta walked into the room, her eyes just peeking over the top of the thick book she pretended to read. From the corner of her vision, she tracked every movement. Marta moved like she belonged, like this wasn't someone else's house, like she'd lived there longer than anyone. Her humming was soft and sweet, always the same tune, drifting through the halls like perfume. To anyone else, it might sound comforting. To Lila, it was a warning. She watched as Marta straightened the pillows on the couch for the second time that morning, even though no one had sat there. The woman's fingers lingered on the edge of the coffee table, smoothing a surface that didn't need smoothing. Then, without checking over her shoulder, she slipped something out of her pocket, a phone, black and sleek, and snapped a quick photo of the room. Lila's breath caught in her throat. It wasn't the first time. 2 days ago, she'd seen Marta do the same thing in Blake's office. A glance over the desk, a silent swipe of her phone, and gone. The movement was quick, practiced, like she'd done it 100 times. Marta didn't know she was being watched. That was Lila's gift. She knew how to blend into the background, how to go unnoticed in plain sight. People assumed she wasn't paying attention. Or worse, that she was too young to understand. But Lila saw everything. And what she saw today only made the list in her notebook grow longer. After finishing her usual round in the living room, Marta turned toward the hallway. Lila quietly slipped out of her chair and followed. She didn't make noise when she walked, not even on the marble floors. Her socks were worn thin, and her steps were careful, her body hugging the wall like a shadow. Marta paused near the entryway mirror. It was tall and framed in dark wood, a gift from one of Blake's international business partners. It reflected nearly the whole hall. Marta moved past it without a glance. Again, not a flick of her eyes, not a single check to smooth her hair or adjust her uniform. She kept her face turned slightly away, her gaze steady ahead. Lila stopped behind the corner, just out of view, her heartbeat loud in her ears. People always looked at mirrors. Even she did. It was automatic. Marta avoided them like they were poison. Why? What was she hiding? From the hallway, Marta moved into the study. Lila followed, crouching low behind the open door. She watched as the woman opened the bottom drawer of Blake's desk. That drawer was supposed to be locked. Lila had tried it herself, a week ago, when she was curious about her uncle's strange-looking flash drives. But Marta had no trouble. She slipped it open with ease, like she had a key, or knew something no one else did. She rifled through papers quickly, snapping 2 more photos with her phone, then slid everything back exactly as it had been. The drawer clicked closed. The smile returned to her lips, and she began humming again, as if nothing had happened. Lila stepped back, her pulse pounding. She didn't understand everything Marta was doing, but she understood enough. The photos, the mirror, the drawers, the keys she wasn't supposed to have, none of it fit. This woman wasn't just a maid. She was something else entirely. And if no one else could see it, Lila would have to prove it herself. Blake Carter sat at the edge of the long conference table in his glass-walled office, tapping through pages of code and legal briefs with the same calm intensity. The city glowed beneath him, a spread of silver and gold lights stretching past the horizon. His AI company had just secured a government contract, and the stakes had never been higher. But instead of celebrating, he was buried in paperwork, court documents, guardianship agreements, tech security audits. It was all tangled together now, business and personal, and he treated it all the same way, like problems to be solved, not people to be understood. He hadn't meant to become anyone's guardian. When his sister passed away in a sudden accident, he'd flown out, signed the papers, and taken Lila home with him without a second thought. She had no one else. He couldn't leave her to the system. The decision had been simple in his mind, practical, responsible, necessary. But it wasn't simple for her. He noticed her, in a way. The quiet footsteps in the hallway, the small figure curled up in the window seat with a book too old for her age, the way she seemed to shrink when adults spoke too loudly. She wasn't difficult. She didn't argue, didn't whine, didn't act out like he expected kids her age to do. If anything, she was too quiet, too polite, like she was always holding her breath. He thought maybe that was just how grief looked in children. He wasn't sure. He didn't know how to ask. Their conversation stayed short. How was school? Are you hungry? Do you need anything? He offered her the best. Top tutors, custom room design, all the gadgets she could ever want. But he hadn't asked her what she liked. He didn't even know her favorite color. He told himself it would get easier with time, that once things settled down, once the court granted full custody, once he had fewer projects demanding his attention, he'd figure it out. He didn't notice how often she watched him from the corners of rooms, how she tracked his schedule better than his own assistant, how she walked through the house as if she were tracing something only she could see. He had no idea that she'd already memorized the sound of Marta's heels on the tile, or that she'd been keeping a list of strange things happening around the house. He didn't know that the girl he had taken in out of obligation had, in her own small way, already taken on the job of protecting him. To Blake, the world was full of calculations and contracts, cause and effect, input and output, love, trust, even family. These were ideas he didn't fully know how to process. So he did what he always did. He provided. He controlled the variables. He made sure Lila was cared for in every way that counted on paper. But what he didn't realize was that care on paper didn't mean connection. And Lila, who had learned to read people with sharp precision in every home she'd been passed through, could tell the difference. She didn't resent him. She didn't even blame him. But she knew he didn't see her. Not really. Still, she watched. She waited. And quietly, in her own way, she started to protect the man who didn't yet know how much danger he was in. Because sometimes, being invisible gave you the power to see everything others missed. And Lila missed nothing. The afternoon light filtered through the high windows, warm and golden, stretching shadows across the floor of Blake's private study. Lila stood in the doorway, quiet as always, her eyes fixed on the far corner of the room where the old wooden safe was built into the wall. It was hidden behind a sleek panel that only opened with Blake's fingerprint, a detail she had noticed weeks ago when she caught a glimpse of him tucking away something inside. He hadn't seen her watching then. He rarely did. Inside that safe, she knew, were a few things Blake didn't want anyone else touching. Contracts, digital drives, and something more personal. A delicate silver bracelet with a tiny opal stone. The kind of thing that looked simple until you stared at it a little longer. It had belonged to his sister, Lila's aunt, and she remembered the way it always slid up her wrist when she reached for Lila's hand. Her aunt used to say it was lucky, that it had been passed down through the women in their family for generations. Lila didn't believe in luck anymore, but she remembered that bracelet like it was a piece of her own skin. That's why she noticed right away when it vanished. She hadn't meant to look into the safe, but the door was ajar, just slightly. Blake had been in a rush that morning, grabbing a flash drive before heading out to meet a client downtown. Lila had lingered after he left, her feet carrying her toward the room without quite meaning to, drawn by something she couldn't name. The safe's interior was clean and organized, but the black velvet box that had held the bracelet was open and empty. Lila stared at it for a long time, her thoughts turning slow and careful. Blake wouldn't have moved it. He wasn't sentimental, but he respected what was hers. He had even told her once, quietly and without looking her in the eyes, that the bracelet was hers now, that it was part of her story, just like it had been her aunt's. He wouldn't have given it away. He wouldn't have forgotten. Someone else had been in the safe. She thought about Marta, the way she moved through rooms like smoke, leaving no trace but always knowing more than she should. The way her eyes lingered on photos, on files, on things she had no reason to care about. The way she smiled too easily. The way she never looked in the mirror. Lila didn't say anything. She closed the safe gently, pulled the panel shut, and slipped out of the room the same way she'd come. She didn't run. She didn't panic. She just went back to her room, opened her notebook, and wrote down what she'd seen. The date, the time, the exact position of the empty box. She sketched the bracelet from memory, careful to get the small clasp just right. Then she turned the page and made a list, not of what was missing, but of who had been near the study in the last 2 days. The maid, the driver, the assistant. She tracked movements, voices, glances. It wasn't guesswork. It was a pattern forming. She didn't bring it up to Blake. Not yet. She'd already learned that some truths had to be gathered like threads, woven quietly until they were strong enough to pull. So she waited, and watched, and recorded, because something was happening in this house. And the bracelet was only the beginning. The morning was quiet, just like every other morning in the Carter house. The kitchen was filled with the smell of fresh coffee and toasted bread. soft jazz playing in the background. Sunlight spilled across the marble countertops, glinting off glass and steel. Blake scrolled through emails on his tablet with one hand and stirred sugar into his coffee with the other. His suit jacket hung neatly over the back of his chair, his tie already knotted. The day ahead packed with meetings and investor calls. Lila sat across from him at the long table, her cereal growing soggy in the bowl she hadn't touched. She kicked her legs slowly under the chair, watching him, waiting. She'd been waiting for days. Waiting for the right time. Waiting for a moment when he wasn't too busy or too distracted. But the truth was, Blake was always distracted. Always looking at a screen. Always answering calls. He was there, but not really. Still, she tried. Her voice was small, but steady. The maid isn't who she says she is. Blake didn't look up right away. He finished reading the sentence on his screen, typed a quick reply, then blinked and glanced at her over his cup. "What was that, kiddo?" Lila met his eyes, her own wide and serious. "Marta. She's not really a maid." Blake smiled gently, the kind of smile grown-ups give when they think a child is being imaginative. He set down his coffee, reached across the table, and patted her head. Her hair was still a little messy from sleep, her eyes too old for her age. "I think maybe you've been reading too many mystery books," he said lightly. "Marta's been working here for almost a year. She came with great references. She's harmless." Lila didn't respond. She didn't nod or argue. She just looked at him for a long moment, then slowly dropped her gaze back to her uneaten breakfast. Blake went back to his emails. He didn't see the way her shoulders stiffened. He didn't notice the notebook tucked under her sweater, the one she carried with her everywhere now. He didn't know that she'd stayed up late the night before, watching security footage on her tablet, tracing the exact times Marta entered the study, noting how she always wore gloves, how she always left just a little too quickly. He didn't realize that this wasn't a game to her. To Blake, it was just another strange thing a quiet child might say, something born of trauma, or fear, or imagination, something that would fade with time. He believed, deep down, that Lila would settle in eventually, that she just needed space, and safety, and routine. He didn't understand that she had already been through too much to pretend everything was fine. Lila finished her cereal in silence, chewing slowly, eyes fixed on the wood grain of the table. She didn't mention the missing bracelet. She didn't talk about the pictures she'd seen Marta take. She just took one more note in her head. She had given Blake his first warning, and like most adults before him, he hadn't listened. The house was still, wrapped in the kind of silence that only came after midnight. The tall windows let in strips of moonlight that stretched across the hardwood floors like quiet paths, and the distant hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen was the only sound. Lila lay awake in her bed, staring at the ceiling, the covers pulled up to her chin. She hadn't been able to sleep. Not really. Something inside her had stayed tense all night, like her body knew something her mind hadn't caught up to yet. Then she heard it. A soft creak, too light to be part of the house settling, too careful to be one of the security guards. The sound of footsteps, slow and cautious, like someone didn't want to be heard. Lila sat up, holding her breath. She slid from the bed without making a sound, and padded across the room in her socks, pressing her ear gently to the door. Another sound came, this time the faintest click, like a doorknob turning. She opened her bedroom door just a crack, enough to see the edge of the hallway bathed in bluish moonlight, and there, moving like a shadow along the far wall, was Marta. The maid wore her usual dark uniform, but something about her looked different now. Her hair was pulled back tightly, her face sharp and expressionless. Her footsteps were soft, deliberate. She reached Blake's study door, paused, and then pulled a pair of black gloves from her pocket and slid them on without hesitation. Lila's breath caught in her throat. Marta opened the study door and disappeared inside. No lights flicked on. No sounds followed. Lila waited exactly 30 seconds before stepping out into the hallway. Her feet barely touched the ground as she crept forward, heart pounding so loudly she was sure Marta could hear it. She didn't go near the office door. Instead, she crouched low behind the corner wall where she had a clear view if anyone came out. She stayed completely still. Minutes passed, maybe 5, maybe 10. Then she saw it. A flash of light from inside the office, not bright like a lamp but quick and sharp like a camera. Another flash followed. Then another. Lila leaned slightly and could just make out the edge of Marta's silhouette moving behind Blake's desk. She was taking pictures. She wasn't cleaning. She wasn't organizing. She wasn't supposed to be in there. Lila pressed her back against the wall. Her heart steady now. Her mind moving fast. She didn't need to see more. She already knew. When Marta finally emerged, she closed the door without a sound and slipped down the hallway like a ghost. Her gloves disappeared back into her pocket. Her face was calm, unreadable. Lila waited until she was gone. Then she returned to her room, shut the door behind her, and turned on her bedside lamp. Her notebook lay open on the desk. She picked up her pencil and began to write. Time, 12:47 a.m. Location, Blake's study. Subject, Marta. Actions, entered with gloves. No lights. Took photos behind desk. She underlined the word gloves twice. Lila closed the notebook, her fingers curled tight around the pencil. She didn't know exactly what Marta was after, but she knew now without any doubt this woman wasn't who she said she was, and Lila was going to find out why. Blake had been searching for his spare tablet charger when he opened the drawer in the living room cabinet. Instead, he found a small black notebook, the kind sold in packs of 3 at office supply stores. It had no label, no name on the front, just a slight bend at the corner and smudges along the edge from being carried around too often by small hands. He almost set it aside, but something about it made him pause. Maybe it was the weight of it, or maybe it was the way it had been tucked so carefully beneath a pile of blankets, like someone had been trying to hide it but also wanted to make sure it was safe. Curiosity got the better of him. He flipped it open. The handwriting inside was neat but small, rows of block letters in pencil and pen. The first page was a list of dates. The second page had a diagram of the upstairs hallway. There were names, times, notes on movements. Marta's name appeared again and again. He read through an entry that detailed the maid's movements from 2 nights ago. Entered Blake's office at 12:47 a.m. Wore gloves. Took photos. Left without turning on the lights. Blake blinked, then flipped to another page. There were sketches of the bracelet he had stored in the safe, notes about its sudden disappearance, a question circled twice. Why would she open the safe if she's just cleaning? He exhaled slowly and leaned back in the chair. For a moment he didn't move. Then he closed the journal and stared out the window. Lila. He'd never asked what she did in her free time. He hadn't noticed that she always carried this little notebook around, tucked under her sweater or hidden beneath her pillow at night. He'd assumed she was writing stories or doodling, maybe journaling about her aunt, trying to process the loss. He had chalked up her quietness to grief, her watchfulness to adjustment. The notes inside were precise, specific, observant in a way most 9-year-olds weren't. But still, he didn't let himself go too far with it. Kids could imagine things. They could be dramatic, especially when they felt uncertain or out of place. He knew Lila still wasn't fully settled, and maybe this was how she coped, making up mysteries, watching the maid, turning everyday moments into something larger. He didn't dismiss her entirely, but he didn't take it seriously either. Blake glanced at the time. His call with the investor group in Berlin was in 20 minutes, and the presentation slides still needed review. He set the journal aside gently, placing it on top of a pile of unopened mail. He'd read more of it later, maybe tonight, when things slowed down. Right now, The merger documents were more urgent. The international deal he'd been working on for 6 months was about to close. One more step, and it would triple the company's valuation. As he turned back to his laptop and opened the meeting link, the notebook sat quietly behind him. Pages full of things he hadn't yet understood. Clues he hadn't bothered to see. Lila had written the truth. He just wasn't ready to believe it. Not yet. The grand piano in the sitting room was one of those things that looked like it belonged in a museum. Gleaming black surface, polished every week, not a fingerprint on it. Blake never played it. Neither did anyone else. It was just there, part of the image of a perfect home. Lila liked sitting under it sometimes, where it was quiet and shadowed and safe. It reminded her of blanket forts she used to make with her aunt, back when the world had made more sense. That afternoon, while the grown-ups talked in the hallway about deliveries and menus, and some event Blake might attend next week, Lila sat cross-legged beneath the piano, her fingers tracing the edge of the wood, her eyes following the soft shapes the sunlight made on the floor. She wasn't looking for anything, but her eyes always moved, always noticed. There, near the back leg, something caught the light. She crawled forward on her elbows, careful not to shift the bench or make a sound. The object was no bigger than the nail on her thumb. Round, black. It was nestled between two floorboards, nearly flush with the wood, so flat and well-placed she almost missed it. But something about the shape wasn't right. Lila leaned closer. It was a lens, a camera maybe, or a recorder. She wasn't sure, but it didn't belong there. That much she knew with the same certainty she knew when someone was lying. She reached out, gently pried it loose with her fingernails, and held it in her palm. It was cold, lighter than she expected. There were no markings, no labels, just a small, sharp black circle with a tiny silver ridge along the edge. She didn't call out, didn't run to Blake. Instead, she tucked it into her pocket and crawled out from under the piano like nothing had happened. Her face was blank, the way she'd learned to keep it when she wasn't sure who was watching. She made her way upstairs slowly, taking the long route, checking each hallway before turning the corner. Back in her room, she pulled open the top drawer of her dresser, lifted a folded sock from the back corner, and gently slid the lens underneath. Then she closed the drawer and sat on her bed, staring at the floor. Her notebook was still on her desk, but she didn't open it. Some part of her had started to shift. Until now, she'd been recording everything with the quiet hope that eventually someone would believe her, that maybe Blake would read her words and see what she saw. But the journal had been sitting in the living room for 3 days, untouched. He hadn't said a word. So Lila made a choice. She would keep her own secrets now. She would keep the lens hidden and her eyes open. She would build her own kind of truth, one piece at a time, not for someone else to fix, but because she knew that something in this house was broken, and it was up to her to find out how deep the crack went. The hallway outside the laundry room was narrow and always smelled like fabric softener and dust. Lila usually avoided it, but that afternoon she had dropped one of her socks on the stairs and followed it as it bounced down, finally coming to a stop near the utility closet. She bent down to grab it, then froze. Voices. Just one, really, Marta's. But something was different. At first, Lila thought maybe Marta was singing again. She often hummed to herself while folding towels or vacuuming. But this wasn't humming. It was talking. Fast, sharp, low. And the sound of it made Lila's stomach twist. Marta didn't sound like Marta. The soft, slow accent she used around the house was gone. The warmth in her voice, the gentle up-and-down rhythm that made her seem so friendly, had vanished. What came out now was clipped and precise, a different language entirely at times. Though Lila caught enough to understand, it wasn't just small talk. She crept closer, pressing her back against the wall beside the door. The laundry machines weren't running, but the dryer buzzed faintly in the background, covering the soft click as she turned on the recording app on her tablet. She didn't know what she was capturing yet. She just knew it mattered. "No, I told you the layout's different than expected," Marta hissed into the phone. "There's a secondary firewall and too many internal locks. It's not going to be as simple as walking out with a flash drive." There was a pause. Then more words. "Quicker now." "I'm working on it." "He's distracted, always is. Too many meetings, too many calls. The girl, she watches too much. But she hasn't said anything to him yet. She's quiet. He thinks she's just scared." Lila's breath caught. She curled tighter behind the corner, her fingers gripping the edge of her tablet. She didn't move, didn't blink. "I'll get the files," Marta continued. "Don't worry about the safe. I've already seen the combination once. I just need to time it right. Stop rushing me." There was another pause. Then Marta's voice dropped even lower. "No mistakes. I know the deal." The line went quiet. Lila heard the phone snap shut. An old flip model, probably used for calls that couldn't be traced. She didn't hear footsteps immediately. Just silence. Then a long sigh. Then the sound of a basket being picked up. Lila stayed perfectly still until Marta had walked past, her heels clicking softly on the tile, her face calm as ever, carrying a basket full of clean towels, like she had nothing in the world to hide. But Lila had heard everything. Back in her room, she opened her notebook and flipped past all the careful lists and sketches. On a blank page, she pressed her pencil hard into the paper and wrote in big block letters, "She's lying." She circled it 3 times, then underlined it twice. There was no more guessing now, no more wondering. Marta wasn't who she pretended to be, and whatever she was here for, it was bigger than Lila had imagined. The panic room system wasn't something Lila was supposed to know about. Blake had mentioned it once during a call with one of his security consultants, something about upgraded protection and biometric locks. She had never seen it in use, never heard the alarm, never asked questions. But she had listened. She always listened. It happened by accident. She was in the study, trying to understand how Marta had opened the drawer behind Blake's desk without a key. She knew she shouldn't have been there, but curiosity and suspicion had outweighed caution. She didn't touch anything, just looked. Then her elbow brushed against a small panel near the bookshelf. A faint beep followed. She froze. Lights flickered once, then the room hummed. A soft but steady voice began speaking from the overhead speakers, calm and robotic. "Security lockdown initiated. All external doors will seal in 10 seconds. Panic room access available in primary chamber." Lila's heart leapt into her throat. She backed away from the wall, panicked now, not sure how to stop it. She turned toward the door, but before she could even reach it, Marta appeared. The maid didn't ask what was happening. She didn't panic, didn't look around in confusion like a normal person might. Her expression didn't shift. She walked straight into the room, eyes already scanning the ceiling corners and wall panels. "Don't touch anything," she said, her voice sharp and cold. Lila froze in place. Marta's voice was different again. No accent, no sing-song calm, just clipped and focused. She strode to the panel by the bookshelf, tapped a sequence of buttons with practiced speed, and muttered something under her breath. The voice from the speaker cut off. The lockdown halted. The lights returned to normal. Just like that. Marta turned toward her slowly. "You shouldn't be in here," she said, her eyes scanning Lila's face, her tone unreadable. "I didn't mean to," Lila whispered. Marta tilted her head slightly, studying her, then gave a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Of course. Just an accident. But let's not make it a habit, okay?" She walked out without waiting for a response. Lila didn't move until the door clicked shut behind her. Then she sat down on the floor, heart still thudding against her ribs, trying to understand what she'd just seen. Marta hadn't reacted like a maid caught in a moment of chaos. She hadn't even hesitated. She had known the override code. She had known exactly where to go, what to press, what sequence to enter. That wasn't normal. That wasn't something Blake would have taught the housekeeping staff. That was something you learned in training. Not the kind given to domestic workers, but the kind given to people with other jobs. Dangerous ones. Secret ones. Lila got up slowly and walked to her room. She didn't cry. She didn't tell anyone. She just wrote everything down in her notebook. Starting with the words, "She's trained." Now there was no more doubt. Whatever Marta had come here to do, it had nothing to do with laundry. The late afternoon sun spilled across Blake's desk, casting long slants of gold across his laptop and the unopened stack of documents he hadn't touched in hours. He was staring at code, or pretending to. His mind was somewhere else entirely, stuck in the gears of a deal that wouldn't close, a system update that kept breaking, and a quiet house that had started to feel even quieter lately. Lila had been distant. Not in a tantrum or tears kind of way, but in that eerie silence she carried like armor. She still showed up for meals, she still did her schoolwork. But there was something sharper in her eyes now. Something that made Blake feel like he was missing something important. He hadn't asked. He kept telling himself she'd talk when she was ready. Or maybe he was afraid she'd tell him something he didn't know how to handle. The study door creaked open. Soft footsteps. Small ones. Blake didn't look up right away. He thought maybe she needed something. Help with homework. Another book from the shelf. Maybe a snack. Then her voice came barely above a whisper. "Check the security tapes." Blake paused, his fingers hovering above the keyboard. He glanced up slowly. Lila stood just inside the door, her hands clasped in front of her, her eyes steady. There was no fear in her voice, no trembling lip or pleading tone, just calm certainty. "What did you say?" he asked, sitting up straighter. She took a small step forward. "Check the cameras. The hallway ones. The office. The study. Midnight 2 nights ago." Blake blinked, searching her face. He was used to quiet from her. But this was something else. This wasn't a child asking a question. This was a child telling him something he hadn't noticed. "What am I supposed to see?" he asked gently. Her eyes didn't leave his. "You'll see, Marta." "Marta?" His eyebrows lifted slightly. "She goes into your study when you're asleep. She wears gloves. She takes pictures of things on your desk. She opens drawers that are supposed to be locked." Blake leaned back in his chair, stunned by how calm she was. There was no anger, no anxiety, just facts. "She's not who she says she is," Lila added. He stared at her, the weight of her words pressing into the space between them, and for the first time, he didn't brush her off. He didn't offer a distracted smile or a gentle pat on the head. He really looked at her. Something in her expression told him this wasn't about imagination. It wasn't some leftover fear from a foster home or something she made up for attention. She had proof in her voice. And it hit him that he had underestimated her in 100 different ways. Blake reached for his phone, opened the security system app, and pulled up the footage from the study camera. His heart was already starting to race. Lila moved closer, standing beside his chair. Her hand rested lightly on the desk, her eyes fixed on the screen. And when the footage began to play, when Marta stepped quietly into the office, gloves on, flashlight in hand, moving with practiced precision, Blake's stomach dropped. He didn't say anything at first, but Lila didn't need him to. He had seen enough. He was listening now. Blake sat frozen, eyes locked on the footage playing across the wide monitor on his desk. The footage was grainy, cast in shades of gray, but the figure in the video was unmistakable. Marta, hair tied back, face calm, dressed in her usual uniform. But something about her was wrong. It wasn't the way she walked or the way she moved. It was the way she looked around. Not casually, not like someone checking for dust, but carefully, methodically, like she was waiting for someone to catch her. He rewound the footage again, needing to be sure he wasn't imagining it. Lila stood beside him, saying nothing, just watching with that same stillness she always carried when things got serious. Blake had underestimated that stillness. He'd thought it was sadness. Now, he knew it was focus. The footage was from 2 nights ago. The timestamp read 12:48 a.m. Marta had clocked out hours earlier. She was supposed to be gone. But there she was, entering through the side door with a key he didn't remember giving her. She moved through the hallway like she knew exactly where the cameras were. She kept her head down, her steps quick and quiet. The motion sensors didn't trigger any alarms. She knew how to stay under the radar. She entered his study and closed the door behind her. Blake fast-forwarded 10 seconds, then hit play again. Marta stood in front of his desk, pulling gloves from her pocket. She put them on with ease, like it was part of a routine. Then she opened the bottom drawer of the desk, the one that had a special lock. She didn't pick it or force it. She used a key. A perfect match. Blake stared, his stomach tightening. She pulled out a file folder, flipped through the pages like she knew what she was looking for, then placed them neatly back inside. She moved to the bookshelf and slid aside a panel that concealed a backup hard drive. He'd installed that himself. Almost no one knew it was there. But Marta did. She connected a thin black cable from her phone to the port, typed something, and waited. A small green light blinked twice, then held steady. She copied data. Blake paused the video. His hands curled into fists on the edge of the desk. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a nosy employee overstepping boundaries. This was theft. Planned. Precise. Professional. He turned to Lila, who met his eyes without flinching. "How long have you known?" he asked. Lila shrugged slightly. "A few weeks. I wasn't sure at first. Then I saw her taking pictures. Then the bracelet disappeared." Blake looked at the screen again. Marta had moved across the study now, crouching near the safe. He hit play. She entered the first digits of the code, paused, looked over her shoulder, then tried again. The second time, the light on the keypad turned green. She'd cracked it. Blake felt something cold settle in his chest. Marta hadn't just lied. She hadn't just betrayed his trust. She had infiltrated his home, his company, his life. And he had let her, because she'd smiled, because she'd seemed harmless. But Lila had seen through it. Quietly, patiently, and now he was seeing it too. All of it. Blake sat in the glow of his office monitors, the silence of the house pressing in around him like a heavy coat. Lila had gone to bed hours ago, though he suspected she was only pretending to sleep. Her notebook had been left open on his desk, the latest page covered in a mix of words and diagrams, arrows pointing to dates and movements that now made perfect sense. She had seen what he hadn't. She had known. And now that he had watched the tapes, really watched them, he couldn't ignore the truth staring him in the face. Marta wasn't just a maid with a habit of wandering. She was trained, efficient, comfortable, with security systems most professionals wouldn't dare touch. He had security contractors on his payroll who didn't move that smoothly. The way she had bypassed the safe, found the backup hard drive, moved through the house like it was hers, none of it was normal. Blake opened his laptop and pulled up a restricted tool he hadn't used in over a year. It was part of a cybersecurity package his company had built for defense contracts. A tool with access to international data leaks, passport verifications, and facial recognition software tied into global security networks. He uploaded a still image from the surveillance footage, freezing Marta's face in perfect clarity as she crouched near his safe. He hesitated only a moment before hitting scan. The system took a few seconds. Then it blinked. Match found. The screen shifted, displaying a file he had never seen before, marked in red with a string of numbers and flags from 3 different countries. Her name wasn't Marta Alvarez. It was Elena Vasquez. 41 years old, born in Caracas, trained in Europe. No official employment history for the past decade. But beneath that clean surface were layers of buried reports, internal memos, flagged alerts, investigations that had never gone public. Elena Vasquez was a suspected corporate infiltrator. She had been linked to 3 major data breaches in the past 6 years: a defense firm in Germany, a pharmaceutical lab in Switzerland, a tech startup in Barcelona. In each case, the company had collapsed within 6 months of the breach. Patents had been stolen. Private research had vanished. Executives had been left scrambling to clear their names. And in every case, the woman disappeared before any formal charges could be filed. Blake leaned back slowly in his chair, his pulse ticking louder than the soft hum of his computer. She was inside his home. Not just in the guest wing or the kitchen. She had access to his safe, his files, his passwords. She had shared dinners with him, asked about his travel plans, given Lila birthday presents, smiled and served tea while memorizing layouts and watching for vulnerabilities. And he had let her in. The betrayal was sharp, not just because he'd been fooled, but because someone like Elena didn't just act alone. She was the kind of person hired for jobs that required silence, strategy, and a cold heart. Which meant someone had sent her. Someone wanted his company, his research, his next product, before it went public. And he had almost handed it over without even realizing. Blake closed the file slowly. His fingers hovered above the keyboard, then tightened into fists. Elena Vasquez was not going to disappear this time. The call came just after sunrise. Blake was sitting in the kitchen, staring into a mug of coffee he hadn't touched, when Joseph's voice crackled through his phone. Calm, but sharp. "I found something," he said. Blake didn't need details to know it was serious. Joseph had been with him for 8 years. He didn't exaggerate, didn't panic, and never called unless he had a reason. Within minutes, Blake was down the hall, following the older man to the storage wing of the house, a section used mostly for supplies and extra linens. The place was always spotless. Marta had kept it that way. Joseph stopped at the end of the corridor, in front of a narrow closet door that was usually kept locked. The light overhead flickered slightly. He opened the door without a word and stepped aside. Blake looked in. On the top shelf, hidden behind a row of cleaning supplies and neatly folded rags, was a small black case, no larger than a shoebox. The lid was unzipped, halfway open. Inside was a knife. Not just any knife, a tactical combat blade, the kind used in military operations. Its handle was textured for grip, the blade matte black, curved slightly, with a serrated edge along one side. It wasn't decorative. It wasn't something you picked up at a camping store. It was built for efficiency, for silence, for damage. Blake reached for it carefully. It was heavier than he expected, balanced, clean, used. Joseph crossed his arms. "You see the serial code?" he asked, pointing to a set of faint numbers etched near the hilt. "That's government issued. I saw a dozen like it when I was overseas. This isn't something a maid keeps for protection." Blake nodded slowly, his throat tight. Elena, Marta, had been living in his house for months. She had access to every room, every schedule, every security code. She smiled over dinner, chatted with his staff, complimented Lila's drawings, and all the while, she had this hidden in a closet. "This isn't about theft," Joseph said. "This is something else. You don't bring a knife like that unless you're ready for things to go wrong." Blake didn't respond. He was still staring at the weapon, still trying to understand the full shape of the danger they were in. It wasn't just about stolen data anymore. It wasn't even just about corporate sabotage. If things had gone differently, if Lila had walked into the wrong room, if someone had caught Elena in the act, this blade might have been used. Joseph closed the case and locked the closet door. "We need to move fast," he said. "We build a profile, track every step she's taken, and we do it quietly. If she knows we're onto her, she'll vanish before we can blink." Blake looked down the hallway toward Lila's room, the weight of everything pressing down on his chest. He had been protecting the wrong person all along, and the girl he thought needed rescuing had already been trying to rescue him. Blake sat at the edge of his bed, the weight of the past few days finally settling into his shoulders. The journal rested in his hands, small and worn, the pages slightly curled from being opened and closed too many times. He hadn't meant to read it all at once, but once he started, he couldn't stop. The entries weren't scattered thoughts or scribbles of a lonely child. They were exact, structured, a map of truths he had missed. The first page was dated nearly a month ago. It started with small things. Marta humming the same tune every day, the way she avoided mirrors, the odd timing of her breaks. Blake turned the pages slowly, each one filled with careful handwriting, little boxes drawn in pencil marking where Marta had stood, what she'd touched, how long she had lingered. There were timestamps, observations, details about objects moved half an inch on the shelf, drawer handles wiped clean even when they weren't dusty. Hallway lights flicked on during hours when no one was supposed to be awake. Lila had written down the bracelet's disappearance. She had tracked Marta's visits to the study, her habit of wearing gloves, her phone use when she thought no one was looking. One page held a hand-drawn floor plan of the house. Every room was labeled, and in the corners, tiny symbols marked where Marta had been seen at odd hours. Red ink circled the supply closet. Another marked the hallway near the panic room panel. Lila had drawn arrows, questions, and notes. Some pages even had updates written days later, connecting dots as she pieced things together. Blake's throat tightened. He had lived under the same roof, passed Marta in the halls, shared conversations with her over breakfast, and never once noticed the quiet, steady thread of deception pulling through his home. But Lila had. The girl he thought he needed to protect had been watching it all, documenting it like a professional. He flipped to a page that simply read, "If something happens to me, start here." Below it, an arrow pointed to a list of file names, camera dates, and times. She had prepared for the worst. Blake pressed the journal to his chest and closed his eyes. All this time, he had thought she was just adjusting. He'd mistaken her silence for sadness, her distance for fear. But it had been focus. Awareness. A quiet strength he hadn't been ready to see. He set the journal gently on his nightstand and walked to her room. The door was open a crack. Lila sat on her bed, legs folded, reading a book, her face calm, but her eyes alert the moment she saw him. Blake didn't say much. He didn't have to. He walked in, sat beside her, and placed the journal between them. She looked at it, then at him, uncertain. "I read it," he said softly. "All of it." She didn't speak right away. Then she whispered, "Do you believe me now?" He nodded. "I should have believed you from the start." She exhaled quietly, like she had been holding her breath for days. And for the first time, Blake saw her, not as a responsibility or a wounded child, but as the person who had seen everything when he hadn't seen enough. The house looked normal from the outside, just as it always did. Sunlight spilled across the polished floors, fresh flowers sat in vases by the windows, and Marta moved through the rooms with her usual practiced grace, dusting shelves and folding towels as if she hadn't been caught, as if she wasn't already under watch, as if her time wasn't already running out. But everything had changed. In the background, behind the gentle rhythm of daily life, a quiet operation had begun. Blake, Joseph, and Lila met in hushed tones, passing glances and signals in hallways, moving like pieces on a board only they could see. Lila had drawn the map, where the security feeds led, where Marta had slipped through blind spots, where the safe cables ran. Joseph added the technical layers, upgraded encryption, silent alerts, hidden microphones. And Blake had finally stepped into the role he should have taken from the beginning, not just a CEO with too many meetings, but a man protecting his home. The first step was the decoy. Blake spent hours in his home office crafting a folder of files that looked identical to the real ones. Design specs, encryption keys, future contracts, even internal emails. It took effort to make it messy on purpose, to mimic the digital trail of a man who wasn't being careful. They uploaded it all to the office server, made it look unguarded, slightly hidden, just enough to make Marta think she'd found something she shouldn't have. The second step was the surveillance reroute. Joseph led that part, installing a hidden system that fed the real security footage to an off-site location. Blake controlled himself. Every room where Marta spent more than 5 minutes got a backup camera, disguised as harmless devices, an air purifier here, a wall sensor there. Everything she touched now left a record. Every whisper she thought was private traveled to a secure feed, where Joseph monitored with the precision of a soldier. And the third step was silence. They didn't confront her. They didn't change routines. They didn't let anything feel different. Blake kept working. Lila kept going to school. Joseph made quiet rounds as usual. And Marta, Elena, continued to move through the house with that same soft confidence, unaware that every step was being recorded, every keystroke duplicated, every late-night visit to the study fed into a folder labeled evidence. Lila kept watching her too. She noticed how Elena lingered near Blake's laptop a little longer than she should have, how she picked up the decoy flash drive, turned it over in her hand, and tucked it into her pocket. How she stared at the family photo on the desk, not with warmth, but with calculation, like she was measuring how much more time she had left. She thinks she's winning, Lila whispered to Blake that night. He looked at her, and for the first time, there was no hesitation. She won't. The house was quiet, wrapped in the deep stillness that only came after midnight. No footsteps, no distant sounds from the street, only the low hum of appliances and the occasional creak of old wood. The air felt heavy, like it was waiting. At 2:00 a.m., just as they expected, Marta slipped down the hallway. She wore black from head to toe. No humming, no light switches, just smooth, silent movement. Her gloves were already on. She paused at the study door, looked over her shoulder once, then stepped inside. The room welcomed her like it always did, clean, orderly, waiting. She went straight to the desk, opened the drawer where Blake had left the decoy flash drive, and connected it to her phone. Her fingers moved quickly, copying everything. She didn't check the contents. She didn't need to. She thought she'd already won. She pulled the drive, slipped it into her pocket, then walked to the bookshelf and pressed the hidden panel. The backup drive, the one she thought she'd found all on her own, slid out smoothly. She connected another device, copied another folder. It took less than 30 seconds. Then she turned and stopped. Blake stood in the doorway, arms crossed, eyes locked on her like stone. Next to him was Lila, silent and still, her face unreadable in the dim light. Marta didn't speak right away. For a moment, the mask stayed on, polite confusion, tilted head. A hand lifted, as if she were going to explain it all away. "I didn't hear you come in," she said softly. Blake didn't move. His voice was quiet, but it cut straight through the silence. "Put the drive on the desk." Marta's hand twitched. Then she smiled again, just a flicker, like maybe she still thought she could talk her way out. "Blake, I think you've misunderstood." "No," he said. "I haven't." The air shifted. Her face hardened. "You really think you're going to stop this?" she asked, her voice dropping into something colder, sharper. "You don't even know who you're dealing with." "I know exactly who I'm dealing with," Blake said. "And so do the people watching this right now." Marta's eyes flicked toward the ceiling. Only for a second, but it was enough. She knew. She realized. The cameras, the feeds, the trap. "You've been sending data to a secure location," Blake continued. "Everything. Every night. Every step you made in this house. You handed me the evidence yourself." Lila stepped forward then, her voice quiet but firm. We know your real name, we know what you've done to other companies, and we know who you're working for." Marta's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. She looked at Lila for a long moment, not with surprise, but with something almost like respect. "You're smarter than you look," she said. "She's smarter than you," Blake replied. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder, closer. Marta turned slowly and placed the drive on the desk, just as she was told. When she looked back at Blake, her smile was gone. "I underestimated you," she said. "No," Blake replied. "You underestimated her." And just like that, it was over. 2 months had passed, but the echoes of that night still lingered, like the scent of rain after a storm. The house felt different now. The tension that once pulsed through its walls had lifted. The shadows no longer whispered. The silence no longer felt dangerous. It felt peaceful. Marta, Elena Vasquez, was behind bars, her operation dismantled by federal investigators who had arrived that night just minutes after Blake confronted her. The fake files she had stolen had led to a carefully orchestrated sting, and the names that had once hidden behind encrypted networks were now listed in court filings. The company Blake had built was no longer under threat. The damage she had planned never came to pass. But more than the company had been saved. At the long oak table in the kitchen, Lila sat with a laptop open and a stack of papers beside her, her brow furrowed in concentration. On the screen was a mock-up of a new system, a personal security platform designed for homes, schools, and shelters. She had drawn the interface by hand, every icon carefully shaped, every screen tested on Blake's old tablet before she transferred it to her new laptop. She called it the Watcher. Not because she needed to hide behind walls or cameras anymore, but because she understood the importance of paying attention, of seeing what others missed, of protecting the people who often slipped through the cracks. Blake sat across from her, sipping coffee, watching her work with quiet pride. She had changed, though not in the loud, dramatic way most people looked for. Her voice was still soft, her movements still careful, but there was something brighter in her now, something that didn't flinch when spoken to, something that believed she belonged. They had finalized the adoption last week. Lila Monroe, a name she had said aloud a few times, just to see how it felt in her mouth. It felt steady. It felt real. For the first time, she didn't wonder how long she'd be allowed to stay. Joseph walked in with a box of wires and sensors she had asked for, setting them beside her with a nod. "Your parts engineer," he said with a grin. She smiled up at him, then looked to Blake. "You said I could run the first test next week, right?" Blake nodded. "We'll install it together." Lila turned back to her screen, tapping quickly. "Good. I want the alerts to be faster than anything we had before." Blake leaned back, watching her fingers fly across the keyboard. This wasn't just a project. It was a reflection of everything she had learned about trust, about courage, about what it meant to protect and to be protected. She didn't have to watch alone anymore. Later that night, as the sky darkened and the kitchen lights dimmed, Blake tucked her in without a word. Lila reached for his hand and gave it a quick squeeze, just before her eyes closed. He stayed there for a moment, looking at her, thinking of everything they'd faced together and everything they'd become. They weren't related by blood, but family had never been about that. It was about choosing to show up, again and again, especially when it mattered most. And now, neither of them was invisible anymore. If this story moved you like it moved us, don't forget to give it a like. And if you want more powerful stories like this one, hit subscribe. We'd love to have you with us.